Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome to Through a Scottish Prism special edition on the International Court of Justice decision today on the case of South Africa versus Israel on genocide. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by two stalwarts of the programme. Over there in Switzerland, Mr. Craig Murray.
Roddy.
Craig, welcome back. Thank you for joining us today. And also in Edinburgh, I'm joined by Lloyd Quinnan.
Hi, Roddy. Hi, Craig.
Hi, Lloyd. Thanks for being here. Right, guys, let's just get right down to a monumental day today, Craig. One, it's not quite as where were you in JFK mode, but it's certainly a very important day. What did you make of the proceedings and the judgment from the ICJ?
Well, I was pleased with the judgment. It was better than I expected, I think, to be perfectly honest. It didn't give everything we might have wanted, but it gave an awful lot of it. In particular, South Africa's attempt to have the case dismissed on procedural and jurisdiction grounds, which is where the South Africans put in most of their effort. That was all dismissed out of hand by the court, and the court decided that there is a strong prima facie case of genocide against Israel, and the court is going to hear that case against Israel, which will be a bit down the line, probably a year or two, but there will be a full hearing on whether or not Israel has committed and is committing genocide. And that's extremely important. And the court also ruled that there's enough evidence that genocide is being committed and enough danger that irreparable harm will be done to the Palestinian people. So the court should adopt provisional measures and order Israel to stick to them, including ordering Israel to abide by the Genocide Convention, including ordering Israel to stop killing Palestinians and to stop depriving them of the means of life. So that's, even though they didn't actually use the word ceasefire, and you could make an argument that what they ruled doesn't rule out much more limited, what they would call anti-terrorist operations. The court made plain that the current mode of operation has to stop, and specifically said the Israeli military have to stop it. So all in all, I was pleased and frankly better than I expected.
What about you, Lloyd? Are you as happy about this outcome as Craig is?
I don't think any of us who have an emotional involvement can be completely happy with what's happened, but I think certainly myself and others that I know expected something not quite as powerful as what's come out, because I believe that this is quite a powerful statement, effectively agreeing with all the grounds on which South Africa brought the case. The other element I think is very important is the clear pointing out that statements by elected officials of the Israeli government, statements by members of the Israeli military have been taken into consideration, and any further statements that they make will pack into that case that will build towards genocide. I think, again, those of us with an emotional involvement were hoping to hear the word ceasefire, but the other side of that is we expected a fudge, and I think this is not the fudge that we thought. This does not let Israel off the hook in the way that some of us, certainly I did up until the judges sat down, that I feared. I think what they're doing here is, there's many things at play, and I'm sure Craig's aware as well, that the political background to this, the requirement for pressure. All of us were thinking to ourselves, well, we've seen the pictures of the bodies, we've seen the pictures of the destruction, we've seen the entire horror of the past 100-odd days. And to us, the uninitiated and the non-legally trained, we immediately think, yes, It is clear this is genocide, this is murder. Unfortunately, that's not quite the way the law works, and particularly in international courts. The gathering of evidence is so important, because all of those judges represent different legal codes, and there are different legal codes which have to be examined. It was interesting, on television last night, Judgment at Nuremberg was on, and I thought that was a very interesting choice for the BBC to put on television before we heard the judgment today. Overall, I feel the same way as Craig does. I think this is a step forward, but as always, time will tell.
Yeah, of course, Craig, the ICJ have no way of enforcing this verdict. I mean, they don't have an army, they don't have a police force. There's no way of enforcing it. But one of the things that strikes me, and I can't if I'm wrong, but if I may just, if I read, so I want to read so I don't make a mistake, but some of the measures that they want to put in place is to stop the slaughter, to bring in more, stop killing members of the group or harming them. How can you do that and bring in humanitarian aid? How can they be done without a ceasefire? How can the aid get distributed if they're still bombing and carpet bombing and shelling areas?
I think you're right. Effectively, it's a call for a ceasefire, or at the very least, for a stop of aerial bombardment and indiscriminate shelling. They haven't gone absolute. What they've done, I think, is been careful not to rule out the possibility of small-scale targeted anti-terrorist operations where you're sending in troops to take out a specific target. But they obviously are bowing that far to the arguments of Israel that it was targeting Hamas. What they're saying is plainly that's not what you're actually doing. You're inflicting devastation on an entire population. But they haven't ruled out the possibility of the continuance of small-scale operation against Hamas. But plainly anything larger than that is going to violate these orders, because the orders become impossible if you maintain aerial bombardment or random and indiscriminate shelling or destruction of property. All of that plainly has to stop in order to comply with these orders. So, we'd all like to see absolute ceasefire. I don't think it was ever plausible that the court would come down in sort of total victory for one side or another in this extremely difficult, politically charged era where you've got the president of a court who's a US State Department official, or former US State Department official, and you've got members of the court. I think 6 of them of the 17 are from NATO countries. So it was always going to be difficult to get a 100% judgment the way we want, but it's very, very close. It really is very close, and Israel has to report back on its compliance with the measures. And just one quick fun point on this is, I don't think this will actually make any difference to Israel's behavior. Just the way Israel behaves, I doubt the Israelis will pay any attention, but I do think it's going to have a big impact on the behaviour of the United Kingdom, for one thing. I think that the British government is going to find it extremely difficult to continue military supplies, to continue intelligence supplies, to continue giving intelligence, to continue giving aerial surveillance support to the Israelis, because ministers will be warned that they could be in personal danger of charges of complicity with genocide if they continue. And of course, all the claims, including, and we should say, that Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer both look stupid today, and as well as evil, in that they've been claiming all along, oh, we can't say if there are any war crimes, we can't say if there's any genocide, no, this is meritless, we don't support South Africa's case. And the International Court of Justice has come back and said, this is a plausible case. We are taking this case. It is plausible. So Sunak and Starmer just cannot continue with the pro-genocide line they've been taking.
I was on that, and I'm going to come back to Starmer in a second, Lloyd. But what's immediately happened, within minutes of the decision, Netanyahu came out and he denounced the court and said it was an anti-Semitic court. And so it doesn't seem as if he wants Israel to comply with even these measures that we're talking about.
I think this is the unraveling of the Israeli government. Netanyahu is, like many prime ministers, not just of Israel, but of other countries before, is using a war to maintain his own political position, because I think Netanyahu knows that when he goes this time, there's no coming back. And he's an extraordinarily narcissistic individual. And as always, in the populist type that he is, the pugilist type that he is, he's appealing effectively to the Holocaust memory and trying to deploy that argument again. But in real terms, the tensions within the Israeli government and the Israeli military are beginning to be exposed now. Israel always puts its head in the sand, closes its ears and just carries on. And this is what Netanyahu is doing. It is no surprise to me that he was so quick out the blocks. He had to do that for his domestic audience, and he had to do it for the Zionist audience in the United States. He has to be seen to hold the line. The real issue is, will the grown-up politicians in Israel begin now, in light of what's happened today, will they begin to break ranks? Will we see Benny Gantz maybe making statements that are being attributed to him and others, that, you know, it's time to change track? But time will tell.
Yeah, there'll be more than that. Go back to what you were saying, Craig. Techie, could you stick up the video of Mr. Starmer here over the question of what's going on in Russia and what's going on in Gaza?
What I don't think is wise, and this is, you know, we're always being asked to do this, is for politicians to sit looking at clips on social media or on programs and forming instant judgments about whether it's a breach of this law or that. That doesn't seem to be wise. But
is Vladimir Putin a war criminal?
Yes.
Yes.
What I've seen already amounts to war crimes, particularly the awful attacks on civilians.
Yeah, the hypocrisy, Craig, it's off the Richter scale, is it not?
Oh, it's simply appalling, especially when you think that first thing where he said, oh, well, politicians can't make judgments. That was about the ITN footage of the guy being shot dead, the unarmed civilian being shot dead under a white flag. And he's saying, oh, well, you can't make any judgment about whether, you know, I'm not going to make an instant judgment about whether it's right or wrong to shoot dead unarmed civilians carrying white flags. And it's astonishing how far members of the political classes in the West are prepared to go in humiliating themselves and adopting ludicrous positions in order to support Israel, you know, and in order to deny what the plain and obvious truth that everyone can see. And of course, they're used to operating in a world where this is backed up by the mainstream media, and the only narrative is their narrative. They seem to not really have taken into account that everyone can see that they're just lying from what's happening on social media, and I think that's a very big change. But you know, I think it's been an utter disgrace, but Sunak and Starmer, but maybe particularly Starmer, because you'd expect the Labour Party to be a little bit better. You know, I think their total one-eyed blind support for Israel is going to come back and haunt them.
Yep, follow the money. But as you were saying earlier, Craig, about, you know, the UK is going to have to be careful, and cabinet ministers will be warned that they can't be aiding a genocide. What about the US? Do you have any confidence that the US will stop supplying Israel with all its weaponry? No.
I think the Israeli hold over the US politicians, the strength of AIPAC, the strength of the Israeli lobby in the United States, the amount of money it pours in, I think is just far too strong. I don't think this will have much impact in the West. I would say that, you know, I think it's important to remember that in the UK, the Genocide Act, which is what is being tried at the International Court of Justice, is incorporated into English and Welsh law. The Genocide Act is specifically incorporated in English and Welsh law in the International Criminal Court Act of 2001, having actually been previously incorporated in a separate Genocide Act, which was merged into the new act in 2001. But that means that anybody complicit in genocide is guilty not just of an offence in international law, but is individually guilty of an offence in English and Welsh law and can be tried in a court in England. And with this judgment, or with this interim judgment today from the ICJ, there's a very strong case that government ministers should be charged for complicity in genocide, for supplying arms to Israel during this genocide. And that case will become overwhelming if the ICJ eventually does decide this is genocide on the substantive case. And ministers will be warned. I can tell you from my time within the Foreign Office, Foreign Office legal advisors will be today sending a minute to David Cameron on the consequences of this ICJ ruling. And that minute will say ministers are in danger of being liable for charges of genocide under the ICC Act 2001, which incorporates the Genocide Convention. They will be warned of that. And I think you will find both language and behaviour of the UK government moderating a little bit.
Yeah, well, the cynic in me says they'll do what they always do, Westminster, and just change the law. But that's just the cynic in me, that they would take it out. But Lloyd, if the US, the biggest sponsor of the Israelis and the biggest armour of the Israelis, just keep carrying on as before and ignore the court and the court's rulings, and Netanyahu has this, what actually has been gained today then?
Well, to my understanding of it, what's been gained is the exposing, in a much, much broader sense than we've had in the past few hundred days, or the past 100 days, the actions of the Israelis. They are on notice now to the entire world. America is also on notice, but we don't tend to see it in that particular way. America's in an election year. We're in the run-up to the presidential election. No one on either the Republican or the Democrat side is going to do anything that's going to harm that massive AIPAC vote that Craig talked about. So we can't expect America to change its course at this stage. What we have to hope, though, is that behind the scenes, America is talking to the Israelis at least about reducing issues. But I think the main thing that's going to happen will be what's going to be the reaction of the Houthis. Now, the Houthis have made it very, very clear that they are using effectively economic warfare to bring Israel to heel. They have said if there is a ceasefire, then they will cease to target ships heading for Israel. Now, today's judgment, as Craig said earlier, to some degree, is stating that there should be a de facto ceasefire, because if Israel carries on as it's doing, it's simply mounting up the evidence against itself if it continues. I'll be very interested to hear what comes out of Yemen, what comes from the Houthis later this afternoon and tomorrow, and indeed what Hezbollah have to say about this particular circumstance and situation. But, getting back to Mr. Starmer and remembering that the three of us are Scots, the three of us believe that we should be members of the United Nations. It's circumstances like this where the vast majority of the people in Scotland stand with peace, if not directly with the Palestinian people. This is another example of where we as a people and as a country diverge completely from the political class focused and centred on Westminster. And we have to start deploying these arguments. I wished we had heard the name of a Scottish judge representing Scotland as part of that judgment today. Yeah. The whole quantum change there would be if our politicians would recognise that towing the line for Britain and NATO is divorcing themselves directly from the people of this country, who stand quite clearly both in the case of Ukraine and in the case of Palestine, they want peace and they want people to stop dying. We need to start acting properly as a Scottish government on international affairs, reflecting not what the individuals at the Scottish Parliament believe, but what the people of the country believe. This is very, very important. People have been marching in the streets, people have been having vigils. The vast majority of the country clearly wants an end to this horror. And the way to do that, obviously, is for us to become an independent country and have our own foreign policy and not toddle along behind the British and the Americans.
Yeah. Techie, can you stick up that video for me of this wonderful young lady being interviewed in television? It's lovely to see the establishment being taken down a peg or two.
There are many who are saying that, frankly, the Biden administration should have acted sooner and faster, that hundreds of billions of dollars has been put at risk because the Houthis have held this area in the Red Sea at ransom.
Let me get this straight, Yalda. We are bombing one of the poorest countries in the world that has been under a humanitarian blockade. There has been famine. These people have been decimated, and we are bombing them because a couple of guys in dinghies in support for the Palestinians who are having a genocide committed against them. They're objecting to that, and we're bombing them. Come on now. I mean, this is just an insane world for us to even think. I'm so sorry your Amazon packages are delayed. I really am. Like, I wish mine came on time. But, you know, genocide, guys, genocide. There are 2 mothers a day dying in Gaza right now. Humanitarian crisis has been declared to the world day in, day out. If you want to stop the Houthis doing what they're doing, then call a ceasefire right now.
Do you genuinely believe that the Houthis would stop doing what they're doing?
They have literally said that that's why they're doing what they're doing. They have not previously blocked those routes for any other reason except this one. So, yes, I do. And I also think the West needs to start to understand that you cannot just go around playing cowboys in the world. You cannot just go around bombing people's countries, ignoring international law and expect no repercussions. For every cause, there is a consequence. And just because you don't like a couple of guys trying to resist,
I mean, these
the fact
are
that this is
now prescribed terrorists.
Sure, according to Western governments,
well,
they are
also according to the Yemeni people, because they've
which is a Saudi-backed government, which is essentially our. I'm no fan of the Houthis, apart from when they're blockading in favor of a ceasefire, which should have been called a long time ago. How dare we have a conversation about trade when there are children right now being treated without anesthetic? There are things that require us to make some sacrifices, and this would be one of them.
They do have the global economy, global markets hostage.
Good for them.
Bill Browder.
Good for them. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. You cannot allow these people to be decimated and expect there to be no consequence.
Isn't it amazing, you know, people were more worried about the global economy, Craig, than that young lady who I just have got the utmost respect for. She's telling it like the general public are saying.
Yeah, she's she's wonderful.
Yeah.
I immediately followed her on Twitter.
I could be in love. I'm not quite sure. I think I am in love. I'm not sure.
Yes, so did about 100,000 other people, I think. No, she was absolutely superb, and we need more of that. There was a lady on Question Time who decided to interrupt the rubbish that Fiona Booth was talking and start yelling about the Palestinians. And we need to do that. We need to intrude physically upon these carefully manicured spaces where the political elite broadcast their propaganda and discourse. We need people to do this all the time. It's very important, and I thought that was great. I come back to just what Lloyd was saying, and you know the Scottish people's solidarity with Palestine. And there are 2 quick points I want to make on that. The first one is there's no doubt at all that both Scotland and Ireland have an unusually high percentage of their population that support the rights of the Palestinians compared to much of the rest of the Western world. And certainly compared to the United Kingdom, certainly compared to the English, to be absolutely blunt. And I think there's a reason for that, which is that both the Scots and the Irish have almost subconsciously have memory of what it means to be dispossessed of your land and deprived of power where you live. I think our own experience of colonization and dispossession is why we sympathize so strongly with the Palestinians. The other point I'd like to make is that I do think, for this very reason, I do really hope that Palestine is an issue over which we can rally and heal some of our own wounds in the independence movement. I feel quite warmly towards Hamza Yusuf when I see the attacks he's come under from racists and Islamophobes, and specifically over the issue of Palestine, and when I see the things he says on Palestine. And I do think, as regards the independence movement, I do think it is overwhelmingly pro-Palestinian, and it's an issue that can unite us. And maybe it would be nice for once to focus on things that unite us rather than things that divide us.
Absolutely, it would be good. But it is the chicane. What we were all talking, we thought it was a better result than we'd hoped for. There could be some chicanery. Techie, there's a clip there from Rutte, the Dutch Prime Minister. I don't know if you saw this. This came from a Dutch newspaper, where he went to his, if you look, he is saying, he went to his legal ministry and said, what can we say to make it look like Israel is not committing war crimes? And there's the article in Holland. How many other conversations, Lloyd, do you think that have taken part in NATO and European capitals?
I think that's the ongoing narrative in Keir Starmer's office. I think it's probably the ongoing narrative in the Foreign Office as well in the United Kingdom. But what's extraordinary about it is effectively the Prime Minister of the Netherlands has just said Israel is committing war crimes.
Yeah.
That's the statement. Now, they're all running around desperately trying to find cover for themselves, and the Dutch, being the Dutch, they see the possibility of what could happen further down the road. So he's getting on the bus that says, how do I avoid myself getting dragged in front of the International Criminal Court? That's the narrative I read from that. Everyone's beginning to cover their own backsides here. Now, we're letting ourselves be dragged along. All three of us today have said that there is a clear disconnect between the populations in most of the Western countries with their governments, not just on this issue, on a number of other issues as well. And it's back to what Craig was saying, we have to unite round these things as the movement for self-determination in our country. We have to unite round the issues that we will deal with when we become an independent country. Too much of the time we get caught up entirely and completely within things that operate within our borders, and we see only Westminster as the block to where we're going, when in reality we are a vital part of international relations as a geographical place. We are essential to NATO. We are essential to a number of international structures. They are playing around in our backyard. We need to start telling our people that that's happening, and we also need to start articulating the foreign policy and the attitudes towards foreign policy that our people clearly show. And certainly this situation of the Palestinian people is an area of foreign policy that, to my knowledge, for at least 40 years, if not longer, has been a disconnect between a large number of people in Scotland and the British government. Our politicians need to start engaging and indeed educating themselves on the realities of international affairs and where we as a country want to be in the future, and not operate entirely on the basis of we must operate on what the international situation is today vis NATO and the UK, because we're still part of the UK. It's time for us to break out of that and begin genuinely to have a dialogue with our own people about what our international relations will be when we become an independent country.
Craig, one sad thing, we're sitting here having a nice intellectual conversation and saying this is progress. And in a month from now, Israel's got to write a report to say they're addressing these issues and they've got to put all these things in place. We know how many people are dying daily. This isn't much comfort to the Palestinians who are under bombardment as we sit here in the safety of wherever we are just now, or watching. There's going to be a lot more dead before we move forward, but do you see light at the end of the tunnel?
For Palestine, it's very difficult to see immediate light at the end of a tunnel, and undoubtedly there will be many more Palestinians killed by the Israelis. And at the moment, deaths are running at over 200 a day. They're running as high as they ever had, particularly with this attack on Khan Yunis. But I think we also shouldn't forget that, you know, Israel's genocidal acts towards the Palestinians started 75 years ago. They didn't start on the 8th of October. And in the year leading up to the 7th of October, Israel killed 350 Palestinians and detained thousands more, and has done every year. We're just going through a particularly intense period, perhaps the most intense period, certainly since 1948. Except perhaps some of the massacres in the Lebanon. But no, this isn't going to stop Israel in the short term. It is, I think, going to be a crucial point in a turning point in Western support for Israel. And in the fact that the Western political classes, who let's face it, are bought and paid for. It's essentially not an ideological commitment to Israel. It's a commitment to all the funding that they get from the Israeli lobby. The Western political classes are going to find it very, very difficult to explain to their people continuing this kind of behavior in the future, and that. No, the struggle against apartheid Israel is, I think, very similar to the struggle against, apartheid South Africa. It'd be very difficult to say that there was any one particular incident or happening or judgment that caused apartheid to crumble, but eventually it crumbled. And I think that's where we are. This is going to ratchet up the pressure. Certainly a finding of genocide against Israel, and I do believe the ICJ will eventually find genocide against Israel, will be a massive boost to the boycott and disinvestment movement across the world, and pressure will increase. But is it going to actually? I would say I think you might be surprised how even under the terrible conditions of life where they're existing, I think you might be surprised how happy Palestinians are in the Gaza Strip once they hear of this. I think actually that it will raise morale and support them a lot, but will it make an immediate difference to the killing going on? No, I fear it won't.
No. To me, this is, I think, the first time I can remember, Lloyd, where Israel in any way, shape or form is being held to account. It's usually squashed immediately in the Security Council by the US and the UK to block anything, but this is out there in the open. Everyone can see it. Everyone's been following it. We live in the age of TikTok, etc. We're seeing it all. But do we think that this will? Do you think there's light at the end of the tunnel? Do you see Israel changing their behaviours in any shape, way, or form?
It's very, very difficult to answer that, Roddy. I mean, the phrase "light at the end of the tunnel." There's been, suggestions of light is at the end of the tunnel since 1967 and after the 6-Day War. I agree with Craig. I don't think we're not going to see anything immediate, but I do think one thing was said today by the Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom when he pointed out that Europe and the Northern Hemisphere particularly really need to wake up to the reaction there has been, particularly for what we refer to as the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Singapore, all of the countries of the global south who are very firmly behind the Palestinian cause. This is something which I think certainly the money changers not in Europe and the money changers in the Northern Hemisphere are going to have to take into consideration, because this is going to change, as it has been doing in a gradual kind of a sense. This is going to change the political polarity of the world coming. What I would love to be able to say is, yes, I think this will make a difference, you know, within a week or within a month. And it's not going to do that, because already the whole concept of the two-state solution, which has been under, you know, real scrutiny as a future for a couple of decades now, is kind of been put back onto the agenda. But what the Palestinians are saying, don't ask us to involve ourselves in a peace process that we know will just be a process that will allow Israel to continue what it's doing, maintain itself, and effectively be a talking shop where we get the blame. Now, that was effectively what the Palestinian ambassador said this morning, and what the education minister from Fatah was saying as well. I think we need bold thinking, but I don't know where that bold thinking can come from at the moment. I was hoping Cyril Ramaphosa might make reference to it. But the whole idea of the two-state solution, I don't believe is the real future. I believe that there has to be an accommodation between Israelis and Palestinians who live on that land that will allow us a one-state solution and become, in some ways, you know, given that it's the product of such terrible conflict, such terrible challenge, and as Craig said, so similar to apartheid South Africa, where, you know, the entrenched attitudes of particularly the Afrikaners and of the AWB nearly led to a bloody civil war. But the point came where even white South Africans realized it was not in their best interests to continue supporting the apartheid regime. I hope, and I believe it's the only real hope for long-term peace and a long-term solution for, let's face it, the children of Palestine and the children of Israel, is to find an accommodation based on a single state, maybe a single state, two legal codes. But that, to my mind, can be the only solution now. Two states will simply mean the ongoing partition of Palestine, and there will be continued conflict. There will be continued conflict if there's a two-state solution. That's clear from what's happened the past 75 years.
Yep, I think that two-state, one-state is a whole programme on its own. Gentlemen, thank you. The one last thing I would say, just as we close here now, is that we're talking about we need to unite in Scotland, absolutely. If only the Arab world would unite behind Palestine, I think that would bring pressure to bear that would make it quite a different ballgame. But anyway, gentlemen, thank you. Craig in particular, I know you're up to your armpits in interviews. Thank you for coming to Through Scottish Prism. Lloyd, as always, we enjoy your company. Gentlemen, and ladies and gentlemen, till we see you very soon, take care now.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.